Communication and diplomacy is crucial between any diplomatic countries, and in 1969, two countries, El Salvador and Honduras, would face the consequences that would come with failed diplomacy. From June 14th through the 18th, the two nations were in a real conflict that would take the lives of thousands and leave hundreds of thousands as refugees. This was caused by the immigration of Salvadoran immigrants into Honduras. When land disputes began, Honduras began to crack down on immigrants and send them back to El Salvador, who could barely sustain their own growing population. When nationalistic ideals were brought into the tension through football and were then mixed with politics, the chance for peaceful negotiation to the conflict was lost, and a war that could have been avoided took place. This war would come to be known as the Football War. El Salvador has a territory size of 21,000 square kilometers, or 8,000 square miles. In the 1960s, it had a population of around 4 million people. Honduras, on the other hand, has a territory size of around 100,000 square kilometers, or 43,000 square miles. However, at the time, it only had a population of around 2.5 million people, with plenty of jobs that could be offered since there is plenty of land to work and cultivate. This, of course, long before the 60s, had attracted Salvadoran immigrants into Honduras, and for some families, there were 30 generations worth of Salvadoran families in Honduras. There were some hostilities between Salvadoran immigrants taking farming jobs away from the natives, especially those of getting there illegally. This added to the distaste of Salvadoran immigrants, and the disliking of these immigrants increased after the Honduran coup in 1963, which put this guy into power. His name was Oswaldo López Arellano. General Lopez had been a present individual in Honduran politics, and this would in fact be his second coup. His first coup was in 1956, overthrowing the dictator Julian Lozano Diaz. Oswaldo became the Minister of Defense under the rule of President Ramon Villa Morales in 1957. As the dust of the coup settled, Oswaldo gave President Morales his thanks by backstabbing him with his own military coup on October 3, 1963. Then, with some wonky elections that were most likely fraudulent, he became president of Honduras. Unsurprisingly, corruption seeped into his new, more authoritarian administration in the form of briberies. Honduras is one of the big exporters of bananas, and when the United Brands company began to bribe Honduran officials to charge little to no export tax, that left a huge economic strain on the Honduran populace. Lopez's administration was definitely becoming unpopular with the masses. This pressure was what motivated President Lopez to create a growing campaign against the Salvadorian immigrants, since they and Hondurans were now fighting over jobs and land for cultivation at this point. El Salvador was having extreme population growth, and their resources could barely supply the growing population. Many were living in less than ideal conditions, which got them to immigrate, and when immigrants were deported, many in El Salvador protested. In return, the Salvadorian government fully supported immigration as an attempt at controlling their population and relieving some economic pressure. Meanwhile, Honduras was now encouraging their people to show disapproval of these immigrations. While at first violence was looked down upon, it didn't last long. This started tensions between the two countries to rise, as Salvadorians were getting assaulted and harassed in Honduras, and some were straight up murdered. Essentially, both countries were telling the people to blame each other for the difficult situations in their homeland. The nationalistic ideals were brought into the tension through football. The 1969 World Cup qualifiers ended with the Salvadorian team playing against the Honduran team for a guaranteed spot in the World Cup. This immediately filled both countries with patriotic spunk. However, it also added another reason for the countries to hate each other. Both countries were very passionate about soccer and have strong and building political tensions between each other. To make matters worse, they were playing in each other's capitals, and unsurprisingly, violence took place in all the matches that took place. This violence would lead to the conflict in question. The first match was to take place in Honduras' capital of Tegucigalpa. Prior to the match, Hondurans found out in what hotel the Salvadorian team was staying in and began rioting there. Salvadorians had to endure a restless night of loud football fans smashing and pounding on the hotel, and awoke completely tired and not fit to play, if they slept at all. Despite this, the match ended up being fairly close, with El Salvador losing to Honduras 0-1 in a very close goal. This caused, unfortunately, a suicide that added to the tension in the way that it was presented. Amelia Bolanos, a Salvadorian, shot herself in the heart after seeing the Salvadorian team lose on her TV. Unfortunately, and quite disturbingly, the media framed it as if she was not able to handle the loss that the team took. even though it is likely that there could have been other factors that led to her decision. Newspaper publications made her into a type of martyr for the nation and football fans alike. Her funeral was even broadcasted live on the days leading up to the next match. Tension and hatred between the two countries arose even higher as Salvadorians began to blame the Hondurans for the tragedy. The next match was to take place in El Salvador's capital, San Salvador. When the Honduran team arrived at their hotel, this time, the night before the game, El Salvador fans and citizens began to harass the Hondurans, and they showed absolutely no mercy. According to an account from Polish international reporter Ryszard Kapuczynski, the windows were broken, and rotten eggs, dead rats, and stinking rags were thrown into the hotel, and Honduran players were completely exhausted and sleep-deprived. To add insult to a massive injury, the Honduran flag was burned on the same night, and as a final screw you, they raised a dirty hole-written rag when the match started. The Honduran team was taken to the match in an armored truck as rocks and bottles were thrown at them. El Salvador won by a landslide 3-0, and when they were returning to their hotel, more trash was being thrown at them as the crowd jeered. The coach was rumored to have said that it is good that they lost or they would have died in a riot. A final match was needed to settle who would go to compete in the World Cup. That would take place in Mexico City, and it would be the only fair match that the two teams would play. The final match would end 2-3, and El Salvador won. While a resounding victory for those in the main country, it brought hell upon the immigrants in Honduras. Mobs would attack Salvadorian-owned farms and burn them to the ground. Many fled to El Salvador for basic safety. However, El Salvador just couldn't support all the immigrants coming in at once. Many in El Salvador wanted to retaliate for the deaths of their people. So on July 14th, 1969, El Salvador declared war on Honduras. When the United Nations got word of the declarations of war, they flew into a panic, and the day the Salvadorian troops entered Honduras, they began to plan peace negotiations between the countries. El Salvador actually kicked the Honduran army quite deep into their own territory. In fact, they almost reached the capital. The UN did send a letter telling El Salvador to stop, however, they rejected any negotiations for peace. It wasn't until July 18, 1969, that the tides turned when the Honduran Air Force got into the air and put the war at a stalemate. Since the war was no longer to their advantage, El Salvador decided to sue for a ceasefire, with the UN promising the safety of the Salvadorian immigrants. Then finally, after more negotiation and the threat of a sanction, El Salvador withdrew its troops in Honduras on August 2, 1969, with casualties in the 16,000 and injured in the 15,000s, mostly civilians. The war, while brief, still caused many to suffer. In the aftermath of the 4-day war, no one really gained anything from the war. Honduras got more economic problems from the war costs and eventually was exposed in the bribery scandal mentioned earlier in 1975. El Salvador met a worse fate. Since the population problem was now worse than ever, this led to a 12-year-long civil war that caused the death of thousands of people. While being in the World Cup was a huge accomplishment for such a small country, it didn't last long, as they lost every match they played, were the first team ousted from the tournament, and didn't score a single goal. In the end, no one gained anything. This event is an example of why diplomacy is important between countries, and it also shows why corruption and nationalism can get in the way of peaceful solutions. With corruption, there is no honesty, which makes good negotiations unlikely. More evidently, with nationalism, people can get up on the political and patriotic hype to really notice a good solution to their problems. In this case, the two governments use nationalism to avoid addressing and fixing the real problems in their homelands, and it is likely that if the two countries had a stronger diplomatic relationship, they could have reached a peaceful solution to their crisis. And history has repeated itself. In Egypt, as recently as 2012, on February 1st, 74 people died in a mass riot during a football match after fans raided the field angry at the outcome. However, like our football war, the violence can be rooted in political and social problems that have been plaguing the country for a while. As of today, it is common for some people and politicians to make simple things like football into some political propaganda. Real politics are more complex than that, and implementing them into something as simple as a sport is a good way for people to be angry. And when we're angry at each other over something oversimplified that we cannot 100% understand, we can end up ignoring diplomacy and just start fighting without seeing the solution that everyone can agree upon.